Welcome, Parthi. Councillor Kandavel, Councillor Burnside, welcome. And Karen Stintz, thank you for being here.
So yeah, current councillors Jon Burnside, Parthi Kandavel, and also former councillor Karen Stintz, who I will also mention ran an incredible race in the spring for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada. Also, when you tell your friends, and I do this too, and I was living more towards downtown than I am now, the last time the TTC just kicked ass and kicked the shit out of other cities' transit organizations, she was the TTC chair. So it's the Stintz era the Stintzian era you really want to focus on. Well, let's ask our two city councilors. You guys had to listen to all that. This is like me listening to somebody going, you know what's terrible? Radio and talk show hosts. But I want to give each of you an opportunity to go for maybe a minute or so, if it's good with Daniel, and let them sort of introduce who they are, why their position matters, what they do, what ward they represent. Parthi, do you want to kick us off here with just an introduction about who you are and why you're here tonight, etc.?
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Greg. And thank you, Daniel, for putting this together. Bringing people together is so critical, right? I think that's something missing in Toronto's municipal civic scene. The ability to have discussion, debate, even dissent, to your point, is missing in the city. So putting this together is important. Kudos to you, Daniel, and creating that space. And this weekend, we saw how viral the Trump Mamdani presser went. Why? Because you had guys who are calling themselves jihadists and fascists coming together in a room to talk about the things that they perhaps disagree on, but also agree on. And that's missing in this city. So, if Progress Toronto or ABC were to do this, I'd happy to speak there. But it's important that we have this space, and especially at the Mod Club. Kudos, Daniel, aka Flyer Vault, for selecting the stage that our hometown pride in Scarborough Southwest. The Weekend said this stage changed his life.
This was his first concert right here.
Exactly.
And by the way, I saw Amy Winehouse here.
That's right.
When I was 26. Legendary.
Noel Gallagher too.
Noel Gallagher, everybody played here.
And that's critical because, politics is downstream of culture, right?
Yes.
And that's some of the change that we want to see is a cultural change to how we talk about municipal governance in the city of Toronto.
Jon Burnside, I've heard you described as outspoken, and I'm like, he actually is just speaking and giving opinions, and that's what we actually ask of our politicians. So I always like having you on the radio show because you're authentic and you speak your mind. Tell the audience a little bit more about you, why you're a politician, why being here tonight matters.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, and thanks for having me. So Jon Burnside, Don Valley East, which is sort of the Don Mills area, kind of inner suburbs. And I've been a counselor. Well, I was a cop, had a business, and then so in any event, I ran for council because I didn't think my counselor was doing a good job, and I eventually won. And then when Doug Ford changed the boundaries, I lost, and I got hired back by the city. So my perspective is I've seen the city from the inside out as well. As a councillor, you're kind of inside, but looking further in. And so I worked in the encampment office. So I got a lot of experience working in the encampments in Chris Moyes' area and whatnot. And I see my role at city council as trying to hold people accountable. And that's foes and friends alike. And I think sometimes in politics, we excuse the behavior and the choices of our friends because they're our friends or the people that see the world in a similar vein. And so I try to sort of say, this is right, this is wrong, and wherever the chips fall, they will.
And Karen, you've got this great resume as a counselor of being respected by people you agreed with and disagreed with, and I'm sure that's a big reason for your motivation in the spring. It's not just the country, but the area where your neighbors live and where your friends are and the parents that your kids hang out at, their houses and all that. So community really matters to you. I know that.
It does, and I've been in Toronto my whole life. I was born here, raised my kids here. As it happens, I live 6 blocks from where my parents got married, which is unusual in the city. But cities are fragile. And I think over the last little while, we've taken our city for granted, not just the political class, but the other levels of government. And they just assume that it's going to keep working. And it's not working right now. When I think about the power of a mayor, I was a city councillor when David Miller was mayor and when Rob Ford was mayor. And I can tell you that they didn't have strong mayor powers, but they were strong mayors because they had visions. And I didn't always align with their politics, but David Miller had a vision for transit that he wanted to connect the city from, border to border, north to south, east to west. And he pushed that vision and he got money for transit. Rob Ford had a vision for this city, and it was a city that ran more efficiently and respected the taxpayer. And under Rob Ford, we were able to get garbage outsourced, which is something that we were told we would never be able to do. And so each of those individuals brought a vision, their own vision to the city, and they rallied support, and they built a community base, and they built consensus, and they moved the city forward in a way that I haven't seen the city move forward in some time. And so why I come out tonight, why I speak out, why I'm on radio panels with Jon is to tell the other side of the story where I've been part of a city that's worked and I've seen the city stop working the way that I think it could. And when we think about how cities are fragile, it is really our opportunity to stand up and defend this city and protect it from the current slide that it's going under, turn it around and demand that it gets the attention it deserves. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel.
Why don't we slide it back in that direction, Daniel? Obviously, it's your night. Jump in anytime here on this.
Yeah, I was just, when Karen was talking about past mayors, David Miller and Rob Ford, two images come to mind. First was David Miller with the broom. I just had, it's burned in my mind when he won. He had the broom and we're going to clean this place up. Now, did he? That's debatable, but I remember that was a powerful optic. And then for Rob Ford, that man cared about public money. He cared about waste. He coined the term the gravy train. And it really feels like we're on gravy train 2.0. And I feel like we owe it to Rob and his legacy to fix the fiscal situation that this city is in. I still have the Rob Ford magnet on my fridge with his personal phone number. Like, that's what this guy did. He gave his phone number to everybody, and he was taking calls from constituents until 1 a.m. That's a fact. And that's why history has been very kind to Rob Ford, and people really do miss him.
Let me go to Parthi and then Jon on some of what Karen alluded to, which is watching some frustration with how the city's operating. Parthi, you're a newer councillor. You ran a great campaign out in Scarborough to get elected in a by-election. What is encouraging you by what you see, but also let us know what frustrates you in terms of advocating for your area or advocating for something that you think helps the city overall. Where do you run into roadblocks that you wish just didn't exist?
Good question, Greg. I think what we've seen recently, and I know there's some RAs here, is the lack of complexity when it comes to policy and this propensity for a one-size-fits-all. Without getting into the layers of the sixplex and the neighborhood retail, there's genuinely a lack of curiosity to the complexity of Toronto. We say we're a city of neighborhoods, and the inability or the lack of enthusiasm to understand that is a challenge. Number two, like those of you who are versed with this culture at City Hall, and particularly with and this criticism goes beyond just this administration, the siloed nature of our respective divisions is disheartening. We see this a number of times. I'm sure Jon has more examples where we've got to connect the dots when we expect city staff to. And this reality that the fault line in our city is between the suburbs and the core. And that seems to be lost on a number of councillors who don't understand, and this coming back to the origin story of Sankofa, for those of us, it's not about the money. The 400K.
You're not allowed to say that word in this room.
It's not about the word. The money. It's about 400K. To some of us who are critical is the performative nature of it. To say that this name change is going to address the deeper problems affecting the Black communities in my ward in Scarborough is actually hurtful and harmful in that it doesn't address the inequities that exist.
And ultimately the accountability, which she doesn't. But I think it also is with staff as well. And there's some great staff members. So I'm not here to, crap on them. But when there's a major problem, and, we had problems with staff that were punching cards incorrectly or, stealing time, whatever the allegations are, it's not a learning opportunity. Heads need to roll. And I think that's why government is fairly ineffective, because there is a lack of accountability, mostly in the management. And I had a boss when I was a cop. He said people want the salary of a manager, they just don't want the responsibility, and that's got to change. And so I think and then to Parthi's point, we're a lot more. It seems that some of us on council are a lot more concerned with virtue signaling, or whatever you want to call it, these token things, as opposed to actually doing things that'll make people's lives better. Yep. All right. And I think that's what the focus is. Like, how do we make people's lives better? Not just make 10 or 20 activists feel better. And so that would be my frustration.
Karen, I loved how you brought up David Miller and Rob Ford. They'd be diametrically opposed. And when Rob was a councillor, he had his battles, obviously, with Mayor Miller. But it's sort of like, all of us have a boss, and it's just like, but they're putting the time in. If you come to them, they'll listen to you. To the point that Daniel made earlier, that if someone says, I really need to talk to you about something that's going on in a ward, there's an audience. And I feel like I don't know if you see this from afar. We're struggling with that right now. Like, the accountability and the sincerity to say, I'm going to take your problem seriously because you're telling me it's important.
Well, I would agree with you. And I would add another dimension to that, which I think is equally more concerning. And that the city's position right now, and it's happened over time, and it's not just in Toronto, it's what we're seeing across democracies, is that there is there's no longer neutrality in the way laws are administered and the way public order is protected, even in the way processes that I took for granted on council are administered. And we see it all around us. And that there is the belief that because people are unhoused, that they should live in a park. And that is a misplaced belief. And our bylaws are very clear, but they're not being enforced, because the position of the administration is that the bylaws don't need to be enforced because they wish to make a political statement about homelessness. That's not okay. That is not okay. And we see it with the protests as well.
We saw that at Dufferin Grove. Dufferin Grove was an activist camp. That was an activist encampment.
Right. So there's this assumption that everybody's in an encampment is just there because they've fallen on hard times. And some of that is true, and John can attest to that. But the reality is there's a lot of people there that are living off the grid because they're trying to evade the law. And they're there for reasons that are not just simply about falling on hard times. The other piece is we've seen it in the protests that have taken over our streets for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And they are illegal. They are illegal. And it doesn't matter how you feel about what's happening in the Middle East. Everyone has a right to feel what they feel and to believe what they believe. But you cannot take over public streets because you have a personal belief. And the administration knows it. They don't enforce it. They don't let the police enforce it. And they hold neighborhoods hostage. And it's not okay.
Not okay.
And we see it with the Sankofa Square. If you want to rename a public asset, like a square, there is a process. It's a documented process. It goes through scrutiny. It starts at city council and then goes from there. This process did not do that. It was done under the cloak of night for reasons that were intellectually dishonest, brought to council as a done deal. That is exactly not how it should be done. But this administration allowed it because of its political and its partisanship and the way that it's now enforcing our bylaws, having the police do their work, renaming our public assets, and it's wrong. It's not neutral. And the one thing that I will say about David Miller and Rob Ford, they had polar opposite views of the world, but they always respected the neutrality of our laws, the ability to enforce them, the process that the city puts in place to protect our democracy, to make us accountable, and all of that has gone by the wayside over the last several years.
Mic drop. And, just to add to that, another thing that has really deteriorated during Chow's term is public consultation used to be a thing. It was actually a mechanism to show respect for the electorate and for constituents and citizens. And it was done previously with a modicum of integrity. Now it's not even done, if at all. And if it is done, it's just to check a box, or it's done at the 11th hour quickly, just to say, oh, we did public consultation. They, especially with the shelters as well, they're putting shelters now in areas that they shouldn't be in, especially shelters that are having drug activity. And many counselors are saying, not you guys, but other counselors are saying, oh, well, we delegated it to city staff. That's a cop-out. You are accountable. You are the counselor. This is your ward. You can't just say, oh, I delegate. In 2018, there was a motion and we delegated it to city staff. And so James Pasternak didn't even know that the Keelan Will, like his own residents had to tell him they're planning to put a shelter at Keelan Wilson, and he was totally sidelined by that. That speaks volumes.
Parthi, you probably want to speak to that because you came on our show on the radio and you were upset because your constituents, one famously people would know, Jennifer Hedger on TSN, who's a great broadcaster, and she was taking a risk by speaking up. I'll tell you, she was. She they didn't like that.
Yeah.
Her bosses didn't, but she said, I need to make my voice heard, that we didn't get any consultation. And to Karen's point, of course we need a shelter. Ask the freaking people who live there where we think it should go, and we'll give you a good answer.
That speaks exactly to the culture that, dissent is dismissed, the lack of nuance. When that came into my ward, there was never any conversation or question to the local councillor, to me, to say, hey, does this make sense? Our ward in Scarborough Southwest is actually home to the most shelters in any of the suburban wards. We have a history, and the 5 that exist work very well because they're close to the amenities, high order transit on major arteries. So when this was put in a very family, senior-oriented residential neighborhood, it made no sense, particularly the nature of the conversation following it, that any dissent, any disagreement, or room for whether this will succeed was dismissed. And this is one of the fault lines, I think, that exist in the culture at City Hall, is the ability to engage and understand the local perspective. And it is unfortunate that it's ongoing, but that's part of what's missing in our, civic space, right? But I agree with everything Daniel posts? No, but I'm here to debate, discuss on issues. And we don't have that at City Hall, which is, ironic given the tradition of municipal democracy in Ontario has been nonpartisan. It's to allow for independent voices to come in to discuss, debate, and agree on a path forward that is reflective of their communities. And I certainly haven't seen that on this issue.
And again, I want to give you guys such credit for being here and saying this publicly, because I will tell the audience, the councillors who come on 640 Toronto will tell me, they're like, this is how I feel. I'm like, you got to say it on the air. And they're like, I'm afraid to. And there shouldn't be a culture of fear when you're an elected representative to be able to advocate for the people, not only who voted for you, but the people who didn't. You've got to be a counselor for everybody, and they're gonna want you to do that, and they're gonna want you to be able to be heard by the powers that be.
Right, and I don't think I've personally ever had that feeling. I know other counselors may well
haven't. No,
but I think it comes back to, there are 2 things I'd want to say to that. One is that council has itself to blame in many ways, because we're the ones that delegated authority to staff, and we shouldn't have done that. And there are multiple decisions over multiple years that allowed that to happen. So, but to Daniel's point in the earlier conversation, we were talking about who should be mayor. And I think it was Daniel's point, is that the mayor is going to be here 4 years, 8 years, whatever that is. A councillor is going to be here 30 years, right? And those are the
term limits.
Well, yeah, fair.
He's like, I will never do this 30 years.
Fair, right?
You'd
but
have
they
to tell
are
me.
like a lot of them are pushing that, right?
Yeah.
And the mayor derives his or her power from council, and in so many of the crazier things. And so it's about targeting council races, not targeting every council race, but picking the ones, the 3 or 4 that you have a chance of actually unseating. That's what Progress Toronto did. When Progress Toronto beat Mark Grimes, they had basically conceded the mayor's race. So they knew John Tory was going to win. So they didn't expend any resources to that race. So they had lots of resources to go after Frances Nunziata. She only won by 90 votes. And then to defeat Mark Grimes. So I want a competitive mayor's race, whoever that person is on the right, so that Progress Toronto has to protect the generals and we can knock off some of the colonels.
Will you give people just a sort of Wikipedia, couple paragraphs about, just in case people had never heard of Progress Toronto? What is it? Who are they supporting?
Yeah, so they were actually, I believe the founder was out of Mike Layton's office originally, and basically to promote progressive causes. And I personally think that some of the stuff they do has gone a little bit far, but it's all, Brad Bradford gets attacked all the time. Anyone that they see on the right, but it's all about getting progressive, and I'll use those quotations, progressive voices at council. And they're, I'd say they're kind of an offshoot of the NDP. And but they've been very effective because they are able to muster the resources. And by the way, notwithstanding your involvement, Daniel, most of the people that come to council and depute are from that sort of viewpoint in the world. So council gets a very skewed view of what's going on. And also they're, when those people are 90% of the voices, they're going to get a lot more wins than they deserve. So that's why it is important to have an organization that counters that. Now, the one thing I will say is, for me, I don't like Progress Toronto because they sometimes targeted staff. And I had someone when I worked in the encampment office. He did wonderful work. He was passionate, compassionate, and just a great guy. But they started attacking him, and so I didn't like that about Integrity Toronto, IntegrityTO with Aretha. And I'll just put that on the table because that's what we're here to do, is discuss. The position, fine. The choices that council makes, fine. I don't like targeting staff. I think there should be accountability, and I'll just leave it at that. Okay. But they do have a nasty side to them, and I kind of want to stay above that fray. I think there's enough going on in the city that needs to be fixed that we can do that and still accomplish what we want to do.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say regarding my critique of the chief protocol officer, Aretha Phillip, I'm sure she's a wonderful lady. I'm sure she's a nice woman. But I, like so many people, felt that her inserting land acknowledgements, African land acknowledgements, and all these other deviations of protocol that we haven't done since we started remembering our veterans since 1919. And I thought that she doesn't... Who is she to manipulate a tradition? I didn't insult her as a person. I was basically saying I felt strongly that the Remembrance Day is sacrosanct, and you don't mess with it. And that was really my critique.
Let me come up on that. Go ahead, Parthi.
Quickly,
we'll come up on that.
Just one quick
thing. Now we'll get this to a lot more interesting in a minute here too. Yeah.
But this is a good example of why debate and dissent is important. John and I have the same position on this, right? That, to Greg's earlier point, council is supreme. There isn't clarity that Aretha did that on her own. To me, and my understanding, I think John may agree, is that direction is given by council or the city manager, right? It's not on the individual, but that's okay. You've got the freedom to critique, and we have the ability to debate and push back on you. But that's what's important, right? That
I think that's the concept,
freedom
though,
of speech.
But I get the frustration because there is no way Olivia Chow doesn't say, hey, what are we doing for a land acknowledgement for Remembrance Day? Aretha, can you take care of that? And you saw what she did, and it was written about, and we talked about it. It got delegated to 2 cadets who are 19 and 20 years old because she did it last year and took. I know, I don't like it either, but that's coming right from the top. If Aretha Phillips says, no, Mayor, I don't think that's the right thing, they'll find a new chief protocol
Okay, so if
officer.
you're the chief protocol officer and you're deviating from protocol,
But that's the mayor telling her
Then
what
what?
the protocol should be, right?
So it's actually, so I spoke to the city manager because I wanted to be very clear on what I was saying tonight. And that is essentially, there's no policy on what to do, what not to do, although at city events, we now tend to, and not exclusively, but do both acknowledgements. And I think there's absolutely a discussion about that particular acknowledgement. But I don't think it's a personal thing about her. It really isn't. She's a wonderful person. How much she makes is what the city is decided
More than
she
Doug
makes.
Ford.
And so I just think there's an absolutely valid discussion about that acknowledgement, 100%. And thank you for bringing that up. Like, I will say that right now. Thank you for bringing that up. I just think that going after the city employee who really probably didn't have much to do with it, from all I've gathered, is just not something I'd be comfortable with.
I know I want to move. I want to move to encampments, and I sure want to talk about the protest that Karen brought up. But I'll get to Karen on this. I think a lot of the frustration. Bet you a lot of people in here know how much the city's spending on the World Cup of Soccer next summer. It's close now. It's ballooned to about $400 million. That's not going to be the final price tag. And Karen, I bet you some people in here know, and some people don't, because people would say to me, "Well, which councillors voted for the World Cup and which was nobody voted for it?" This was an arbitrary decision during the Tory mayorship with city staff. And I think that's to the other point, what drives people crazy is a councillor like John or a councillor like Parthi, or if you'd done this, you're going to get the shit for this. How could you spend $400 million in the World Cup? We didn't even get a vote. That's the kind of stuff I think that, to Daniel's point, to probably a lot of people's points in here, if I elect somebody, I want them to have a say in a huge decision like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I wasn't on council at the time. I can't say I understand all of what happened, but what I do know is that there was a contract that was negotiated, executed, and signed and executed that didn't involve council, and that is unorthodox, extremely unorthodox. There's a lot of things that, again, aren't transparent. That didn't come to council for at least their acknowledgement and approval, and as taxpayers and as citizens, that should be a concern. Because you have a right to know what council is voting on in your city that you will ultimately have to be paying for. And so I find it very problematic.
I'll start on that sort of shelter front. If Daniel wants to take it first, and then we'll slide down the row here. Obviously, the open drug use drives you crazy. The tents drive you crazy. Again, this is a scenario, everybody's seen it. I said to you on the air this morning, it's like if you said, who's a restaurant for? Well, it's for everybody. Who wants to go to a concert, a Leafs game? Well, anybody that can afford it. The parks are either for families and kids, or they're for people sleeping. They don't coexist. You can't cross those magnets. They don't work. And you can judge a major city in North America and go, this city has it right. It's for families. There's mothers pushing babies. There's kids on the playground. There's dads throwing footballs around, and vice versa, obviously. What solves this? What type of government on its own in a municipal setting can solve all these issues?
well, firstly, a government that doesn't normalize drug use, a government that doesn't adhere to this mentally sick, morally bankrupt ideology of harm reduction, which purports that their drug users are normal people like you and I. So we should just let them do drugs. Let's actually help them do drugs. Let's give them needles. Let's give them crack pipes, meth pipes. This is sick and twisted. And that sends the signal to all the people who are addicted on the streets that the government is going to let you continue to kill yourself. And that sends such a horrible message, not just to the user who needs oftentimes major intervention, even involuntary. I've seen some people that are so gone and are defiling the public realm in such a terrible fashion. They need to be removed from the streets. I'm sorry, civil liberties have a limit And when you start really not only just violating the criminal code, but harming those around you, communities, families, children. Like, for example, 10 years ago, we didn't have a needle drop-off box at Jimmy Simpson Park that, by the way, somebody broke into it. Maybe they were looking for drug residue in those needles. There was a photo I posted, and this was a horrific photo. Thousands of used needles were spilling out of this box into Jimmy Simpson Park right at just east of Queen and Broadview. I posted the picture. It got 60,000 views. The city of Toronto, who, by the way, looks at all my content, they cleaned it up within 3 days. But this is what really disturbed me about it. They fixed the box, they cleaned it up, and then they painted the box like rainbow colors, like purple, and they drew like butterflies on it. No, you should be drawing like skulls and like biohazard and like stay away. We don't want children to think that drug use is normal and okay and then pretty it up with all these nice colors. That's what's happening because the harm reduction cult, and it is a cult, is fully entrenched at City Hall, and they're on the wrong side of history, and that's what we have to end. I believe this in my bones.
I will say, Karen and I are well aware this is also federal Liberal policy. They just brag about it a bit less, but it is still federal funding on this front. They are still into the harm reduction game. They just don't puff their chest out about it anymore.
And many police officers have told me that they feel hamstrung to enforce this stuff because there's this idea of decriminalization. There's still a massive block of anti-police, defund police types that work at City Hall and are in the ears of the mayor and others. And that puts the police in a very tough spot, notwithstanding the fact that the Attorney General, we don't have, it's catch and release now, right? So this has to be multiple levels of government to finally fix this issue.
Parthi, you see this where you live? And obviously it concerns residents, it concerns parents. It's one of the big issues about a shelter is there, especially for women, there's no way shelters are safe if you're allowing people to use in those specific city-funded shelters. You got weapons, you got pets, you got drug use every night. Why will you go in there and leave that tent where you feel like you're in a community?
No, exactly. I think, when we talk about shelters, there's two types. You've got the transient ones where we're seeing folks who need support, who need shelter, refusing given the conditions that they're seeing. And then, of course, there's the more longer term ones that do work. And that conversation involves obviously looking at both. But to Daniel's point, I think what's interesting and why dialogue and discourse is important, because we saw, I think a week ago, the NDP Premier Wab Kinew come out, right? Yeah. And that was brave of him because he took flack from the left on that issue of looking at how alternative strategies need to be considered given the apparent failures he was seeing in Manitoba that he was responsible. That lack of discussion, and that's what Torontonians are looking for, is that we're able to have critical takes on the different perspectives that put forth solutions that work. And this is what's missing in this conversation is the openness to alternative strategies that can succeed in the clear failure of certain strategies.
Jon, as a former police officer, you're probably speaking to more current cops than the four of us combined, but they're probably telling you harrowing stories about what they're seeing on the streets, in the parks, in these areas, and coming in and out of shelters, and they just don't feel supported at the top level, and they sure don't feel supported by the top level of city council, do they?
Well, no, and I see my fair share, right? In the because I was in charge of the encampment office, so I was in all the parks, in all the hotels, and I think it speaks to a larger problem of let me just say, there's a great book called San Francisco by Michael
Schellenberg. Yeah.
There you go, right? And he was a leading drug decriminalization advocate in the 90s, and he sort of had a
woke up,
had a 180, and what he spoke about there, which is kind of the larger problem, is what we're having here, is that people with a certain mindset prioritize victimhood over personal responsibility and civil order.
Yep.
Right. Yep. And I think that's the fundamental problem And so, I said when the last mayor's race was going on, I said, well, it's probably a good thing if Olivia Chow gets elected because things need to get worse before they can get better. Right? I wasn't actually trying to be funny, but well, I think we're at that point, right? And we've talked on the radio quite a bit, and I always say, look, we have a responsibility to people who need our help, but they also have a responsibility to society. It's not a one-way street. Right, and I think that until we, this whole thing about harm reduction, I had lots of discussions with the former medical officer of health, chief medical officer of health. Harm reduction is about keeping people alive till you can get them treatment. It's not about just keeping people alive in some sort of semi-comatose state. And that's what successive governments, federal government, the city government have done. We've got the first part, but we never do the second part. And that's the critical missing piece. And I can tell you the people living in the parks, 95% of them are either mentally ill or have drug addictions. That's not a condemnation. It's an observation. And so when we say there's an affordability crisis, absolutely. But the people living in parks, there's a different type of crisis. And until we're ready to accept that and put some responsibility on all members of society, nothing's going to change.
Karen, like I said, in Eglinton Lawrence, such an issue when we would have knocked on the doors, it sure is out in Durham region now where we're seeing things we've never seen before with open drug use, fentanyl encampments. And to Parthi's point, when we see Awab Kanu say we need to have conversations at the minimum about involuntary treatment, what could a future city council do after it switches some things up potentially in the fall of 26 to sort of change this? It's not going to happen overnight, is it?
No, but I think, not to echo what everyone has been saying, but I think the starting point is to say that our policies are failing. And no one said that yet. We haven't heard anybody say our policies are failing, but the evidence is all around us. And so, sorry.
Daniel's mentioned it, I feel like.
But our harm reduction policies are failing. Our approach to encampments is failing. Our inability to protect city assets for their intended purpose is not happening. So the TTC is not a moving shelter. Period. End of story. It is not a moving shelter. And it's okay to say that, and it's okay to say that people who didn't pay their fare shouldn't be on the TTC. That's not mean. It's not a mean thing to say. And there are systems in the world that are designed to make sure that people who don't pay their fare don't get to treat the system like a shelter. We need to be able to say what's happening is not working. It doesn't victimize the people that are sleeping in the parks or sleeping on the system. It doesn't. It actually says to those people, there is no dignity in living this way. There is no dignity in living in a park. There is no dignity in sleeping on a subway. There is no dignity on open drug use, crack pipes, needles. That is not okay. But we need to start from a place of, it is empathetic to say we don't want to see people sleeping in a park. From there, we now acknowledge our policies around it have failed, and now we have a conversation about what success looks like. But we're not even having the conversation about failure. It gets wrapped up into this, oh, well, where else are they going to sleep? You know what? Can we just agree that they shouldn't sleep in a park? Can we just start there, right? And then we can move forward. But I will tell you, that in my neighborhood, unfortunately, there is a view that, well, you know what, I guess they have to live in a park because they have nowhere else to live, and I feel bad because I have my house and I don't really know what to do about it, so I'm going to pretend that a solution for the homeless is encampments. I'm going to pretend that's the solution. And I can tell you that that is the most dangerous thing that we have going on in our city, is our ability to pretend, and that we blind ourselves to the opportunity to find solutions because we pretend we're dealing with the issue when in fact we're not.
And I just wanted to add to that is, somebody just 2 days ago sent me a horrible video. They were waiting for the subway at Spadina Station, and somebody felt emboldened enough to pull out a crack pipe and smoke their crack right on the platform. So that tells me that there is an air of impunity that is pervasive across this city with people, people just feel they can act disorderly and there's no consequences. So where's the law and order? Where's the enforcement? We spend millions, God knows how many millions, on these special constables and all sorts of other workers on the TTC. Well, how come somebody feels that they can just pull out their drugs and smoke it on the platform? So I think we really need to bring in the deterrence effect. I think we've lost deterrence. Deterrence is supposed to be a behavioral regulator. You're going to go to jail, or the cops are going to come if you pull that crack pipe out, but they don't have that anymore. We got to bring that back.
Yes, and my one epilogue on that story, and then I'll turn it back over to John, who looks like he wants to say something. But my epilogue on that is not deterrence. It's not. Because I remember being on council and we passed a smoking bylaw that says you cannot smoke in a city park near a playground. And I guarantee you that bylaw gets enforced. I was, drinking in city parks. There's only certain city parks that you can drink in, which I think is lunacy, because they're going to stop me from drinking at Eglinton Park when they let everything go on like downtown. Like, I think that's a bananas discussion. But if I were openly drinking wine, having a picnic at Eglinton Park, I guarantee you there would be enforcement. I guarantee you that if I lit up a cigarette next to a playground, there would be enforcement. I guarantee when I park in the wrong spot, there's enforcement. So we don't have a problem with enforcement. We're just picking and choosing how we enforce, and that has to stop.
I haven't told Daniel his story, and I'm glad he wasn't there for the video of my friend, but my friend's 6-year-old daughter saw a naked guy in the subway, pants down. So you don't forget that. Some of us have seen our moms naked when we're 7 or 8, and we don't forget that. So you're not going to forget a 40-year-old man on the subway.
Kids are,
on a Saturday afternoon. You remember things when you're 6.
This really bothers me, and this is the stuff that keeps me up at night, is like the kids are seeing stuff they shouldn't be seeing.
Yep.
They really shouldn't. If you can't manage your affairs and you're so gone on fentanyl that you feel that you can just take off your pants and start pleasuring yourself while you have needles hanging out, this is the stuff that I've personally seen. It's horrific, horrific stuff. We can't it's not fair for us to see it, but it's certainly wrong for our kids to see it. And this is why what you mentioned, Premier Canoe in Manitoba, it's probably even way worse in the streets of Winnipeg. And he, as an NDP guy, was like, okay, the status quo is not working. Involuntary intervention is going to be needed. And we're going to need that here too.
I'd urge really quick, when you get home, or do it now, Google harm reduction industrial complex. A lot of our parents or history teachers told us about the military industrial complex. There's always got to be a war. There's always got to be a next war. That's mostly in the United States. But there is a industry that needs to thrive. There's an industry that needs homeless people, that needs addicts, there's probably people here that are wonderful, like psychologists, psychiatrists, physiotherapists. You need people to get injured. You need people to struggle. But this is a little bit different because it is illegal, and they need this illegal activity to continue in our city.
Toronto Shelter and Support Services 2025 operating budget was $898 million. We're now in the budget cycle. People are predicting it's going to exceed $1 billion and be the third division outside of TTC and the Toronto Police to be $1 billion. Can you fathom that? Like, you see how homelessness is getting worse. You see how the budget is getting bigger. So to your point, homeless industrial complex, what's going on?
Why don't we open up to questions in a minute?
Yeah.
But I do want to let Daniel wrap in the sense of IntegrityTO. We talked about it at the very start. Where does it go from here? Where does it lead into the next municipal election? That's clearly a focus for your group.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I again appreciate everybody in the room. Thank you so much for being here. We have somebody can go, Andrea, you could probably go on the website and tell us the election timer. We're probably 331 days, 7 hours and 33 seconds to October 26, 2026. That is D-Day as far as I'm concerned. And we all need to be ready for that very critical evening. Toronto is going to be going to the ballot box, and we need to do everything in our power to make sure that the electorate knows what's going on, understands the important issues, knows which candidates to vote for. Mind your vote. And I have a feeling that next October, we're actually going to see record high voter turnout, which is a complete complete flip from the record low turnout that we had in 2022, which is kind of what got us into this mess. So IntegrityTO is going to be there. We're going to help the citizen army have the awareness on all the important issues. We'll be working with people in every different ward to make sure that we can get great leadership back to this city so that Toronto can be the world-class city we know it can be. So join us.
I think we have a handheld mic. We'll maybe take it up to 9 o'clock, which is about on.
Yeah, so we'll do a Q&A,
before
right?
DJ Romeo comes out and we can all grab another drink and breathe.
Yeah.
If you have a question, raise your hand. We'll try and get a handheld around for Karen, John, Parthi, or
Who's got
Daniel.
the wireless mic? Oh, you do? Okay.
Hi. I don't even need a mic, but question about the globalization of the Intifada, which is something I feel I've lived through an Intifada, and I don't understand how we are letting it happen in our city. Comments?
Who's that for? Anybody? You want me to? Okay, I can take it. Okay. It's disgusting. It's wrong. We cannot be a city that sympathizes with terrorists. Bottom line. You can protest all you want about whatever cause you have, whether it's local or international politics, but keep it civil, keep it to the public square. Do not vandalize, do not spray paint all your BS all over the public furniture in the realms. Like I've personally had to go around downtown after these marches and clean up, because they're spray painting their trash all over the place. So that's where it doesn't become a normal rally or a normal protest anymore. So all this like terrorists, all the stuff you said, it's got to stop, and we need the police to help enforce that.
Hello, I've got a question about the.
Hold on.
Got a question? The mic is there. Go ahead.
I have a question about the industrial complex with the harm reduction. For the councillors here, how much are we spending on crack pipes and needles? You can go to the various SASE machines, which a couple of them were shut down, but you can get them delivered to your home. You can get them delivered if you go to any of the shelters, they'll give them to you there. How much do you know that we're spending on crack pipes? Because the city will not say.
So I actually do not know. Parthi might. I believe it's through the Board of Health, and it's a little bit opaque where they spend their money.
So actually, because I do this every day, 24/7, I did read Mr. Fury did some investigative work on how much the city spends on needles, and I believe his work showed us that it was at least $5 million. Was that the needles or crack pipes? So for and there's more FOIs that I'm planning to do to understand what we're spending on drug paraphernalia. The city of Toronto has no business using taxpayer money to procure drug paraphernalia. Like, what kind of sick world are we living in? Like, stop the nonsense.
Hi, my question has to do with both the protests and the policing. In the Bathurst and Shepherd area, for months now, there's been terror supporters that not only protest, or you can call it protesting, harass people at the corner, but over the past few weeks, they've been allowed to go through the neighborhoods and harass residents in that neighborhood. Now, this weekend, there were at least 24 police cars, which I feel like those are services that could be better utilized elsewhere in the city, that were there, parked, observing and escorting these people through this neighborhood, harassing the residents of this neighborhood. I want to know, you said that everything that the police and what is being done comes from management, comes from instruction. Why has more not been done by city council to enforce hate laws, stop these protests, and protect the citizens in certain areas from constant harassment?
What's that? Sure. Yeah. Karen will take that.
Thank you. I'm not on council, but because it's the area that I was running for and the area that I represent, I'd like to a chance to talk about it a little bit, because I do think it speaks to, again, the intellectual dishonesty with which City Council and many cities are viewing these protests. And that they right now are using it, they view it as a protection of free speech, but it's not. And we know it's not. We know it's not. It's a much deeper, more dangerous activity of anarchy that is disrupting, and its intent is to disrupt, to intimidate, and to hate, to spread hate. And so the City Council right now is viewing it as something that we can't do anything about, and it's coming from the mayor. And it's not just the mayor, it's also coming from our federal government. But it's not, we have to stop looking at it as a protection of free speech. We have to, again, enforce our laws in a neutral way. Because when we look at what happened in the truckers in Ottawa, they had their bank accounts frozen and they were sent to jail for mischief. So we know we can do it. And in this case, what we're looking at is a much more dangerous network of individuals that seek to disrupt Western democracy in a very serious way, that Secure Canada knows about, that other organizations know about, and they're trying to shine a light on it. And so we are talking around the issue when we need to name the issue. And the issue is, it is not a protection of free speech. It is enabling anarchy. And City Hall needs to get its head around the fact that it is not, these are not political protests, and they need to shut them down.
John? Can I just quick, yep. Yep.
So there's lots of blame to go around, but I'll respectfully disagree with Karen on a couple points. In terms of the mayor and where she's sort of come down on all this, there's no question that she's being weak on it in terms of her public pronouncements and her attending this, that, or the other thing, or not attending things. And, it's only my allegation, but I think it's because of, where her base of voters where they lie. I mean, let's just call it what it is. However, to be clear, City Council cannot direct the police. End stop. Okay? That's why there's even the Police Services Board, they're only there for oversight. They cannot direct the police. Politicians cannot direct the police. Do some politicians step over that line? Absolutely. Absolutely. But in terms of City Council directing anyone, not happening. We did that bubble bylaw and that sort of thing. I can guarantee, I was on the police board for a very short period of time, about 6 months, but then I was removed because I had been a police officer and the province changed the laws that former police officers couldn't serve. And I know for a fact at that time, the police were having conversations with the Solicitor General. That's Ontario. That's the Ontario government, who've been quite silent on the issue, respectfully.
That's worth saying. Yeah,
right? They have. And so it's the Solicitor General that says, or their office, who says, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. The federal government has been particularly weak in the laws. Okay, that's where I think we can both agree. But in terms of City Council, there's not a lot of room there. A lot of councillors are way off base. I'm not disputing that. But in terms of directing the police, that doesn't happen. Where City Council, or where I'll say City Council, but more in terms of government in general has gone wrong, is that for years we've looked the other way. And I'll say public pronouncements from politicians putting external pressure, not direct pressure on the police, but look the other way with all the illegal protests and marches. And it's gone on for at least a decade. People have done what they've wanted. They've closed down the street, back to my whole civil disorder theme. And so now when you have a group that's actually taking it one step further, it's very difficult to rein them in terms of where they're having their marches, because everyone else has been allowed to do it.
Just documenting quick in the city itself, and a few of you may have heard this. I'm grateful if you did. 3 days after the attack at TMU, where there was a visiting soldier in talking about his experiences, and all these mass people just burst through like pane glass. There were people injured. That's Evan Solomon, the former broadcaster who's the MP. I had him on the radio on Friday, and I'm like, we were talking about AI, and I'm like, I'm going to ask you about this. The guy says to me, he's a former broadcaster, so he knows all the tricks. He says, I can't comment on that because it's an ongoing investigation because 5 people had been arrested, all women, all under 30, clearly to intimidate, all with masks on, all videotaping themselves. That's what we're up against. And to Karen's point and to Jon's point, I'll say before I leave it to Daniel, yeah, there's a lot of roadblocks for the city to change some things. But I will tell you, there's a divide right now. I'm going to shout her out because she's here, and I think she's great. Kareem Assad's here, who videotapes a lot of these. I would have done that earlier. And she's well aware of the tension points right now between the police union, so the rank and file, and Central Command and the chief right now. I wish it was a better relationship. It's not. And the rank and file, I know what you're going to say, do it anyway. They do not feel like, to Karen's point, to Jon's point, if they step in a moment and make an arrest and they hear language, to your point, that is absolutely not about, again, we could all have political arguments. I've watched, I joked last night at a thing, I enjoy watching Jewish people argue about Israeli politics. It's like a tennis match. It's back. Nobody's agreeing on anything. It's amazing. That's why they've got 11 political parties. But they will not feel supported by the chief or Central Command. And it's a huge problem that I bet you Daniel will agree the next mayor has to, again, figure that out. Figure out how to get cops on the same page so that the laws are enforced. That's not happening right now. I assure you of that. To Jon's point, yeah, I don't think Olivia Chow is telling Myron Demkiw, do this, do that, or you're in big trouble. But leaders got to lead at the end of the day.
Just to that point, maybe Mayor Chow's not telling Demkiw what to do, but maybe Shelley Carroll is. And the reason I point out Shelley Carroll is how impartial or she's a city councilor, but she is in a very odd, potentially conflicted position whereby she is the chair of the Toronto Police Services Board, and she's also the budget chief. So think about that. The person who's supposed to ask the city for funding for the police is also the chair of the board of the police. So when I see these things,
they won't let a former cop be on the police services board.
So
who might know something about policing.
That raises a red flag to me. That maybe and I hope
Shelley Carroll's been a cop. Is that possible? I don't know.
Well,
Maybe
Shelley Carroll was also a big proponent of defund the police, by the way. She wrote a big article about it in 2020. Now she's one of the most powerful people in the city. But again, it's just, look, I don't know what's going on in the inner workings of the Toronto police. But again, when I see situations like that where one person has so much consolidated power, they're handling the purse strings, but they're also the chair of the police board, that raises eyebrows for me.
Okay, let's try and get like 3 more in the next 10 minutes, and we'll try and
couple more
questions. Speak the answer.
Just
of course, Parthi. I didn't
just
mean to
add to this discussion of policing, and I think we've got to give credit where when progress is being made. I don't think the question on defund the police is at council anymore. The request made by the chief and the force, that was met. The question now is how we police, and coming up in the year is this big question on a successful program called MSIT, the Mobile Community Intervention Team, that there's been indication, we're not sure from which part of the leadership, whether it's the chief or the board, to dismantle this program, which combines a highly trained nurse with an experienced frontline officer to address public safety, emergency room visits, and a number of negative impacts in communities. And why that's up for debate is the question I know we've heard in our community from frontline officers, from social workers, from nurses themselves, that this program works, and why that's up for consideration for discontinuation at the end of 26 is a big question. The second program is MSIRT, which is a mobile community engagement and response team that allows police officers to work with TCH, I'm on the board of Toronto Community Housing, to enter units where we know there are terrible bad faith actors that I hear from the 3 major social housing complexes in my ward, tenants want removed. And why that's being dismantled is another question. So the policing question before us right now is not budget. It's how are we being effective and why are effective programs being dismantled? So that, I think, is part of why this discussion is so paramount, to hear different perspectives, because we're not seeing that. And the irony of it all is that it makes good politics. When you hear different opinions and perspectives, you're now able to govern better and hence get reelected. And that's, part of the irony, because so many of us are looking for Toronto. I grew up in Toronto. Many of us did. I want my kids to grow up in Toronto and choose Toronto to stay. There's so much talent. We see that across every neighborhood, every part of the city. We're not seeing that talent being tapped into. And that comes from not just diversity on the surface, but diversity of thought, of opinion, and solutions.
Great answer. Let's try and get 2 more questions in, and we'll break this up and visit and mingle. 5 minutes.
Hi. I had a question about the harm reduction stuff. So it seems like if you ask the average person, it's like deeply unpopular. There's so many negative effects across the city, no matter who you are. Yet it has such a chokehold on the progressive cause. So why are they so reluctant to kind of fold up shop and say, it didn't work, we tried it, and we're moving on, just quietly? But why do you think they won't give it up?
I'll take it 2 cents. I know, the so quote unquote progressive left in the city pretty well. And my analysis is that it's a very top-down culture within the left. There isn't the freedom, to my earlier point, of dissent and critique of existing ideology and orthodoxy. And I think that's what's paralyzing their ability to expand the tent, ironically, because inclusivity is a language that they rely on. And that, I think, is what we are, and why we're on the stage, is to have dialogue with people we disagree with, to hear differing viewpoints and perspectives, to learn, grow, and reevaluate our challenge our premises, right? And we don't see that happening in certain quarters.
So my answer is a little simpler, is I think they just prioritize victimhood over personal responsibility.
Those are good answers. Who's next?
Omar?
Okay.
Hi, I live in Etobicoke Lakeshore, and I'd like to talk a little bit about neighborhoods and community council integrity. Why is it that community councils can vote down a motion on something that's happening in our community, but it still goes to city council to go through? So last community council in Etobicoke, East York, there were 3 councillors voted no to allowing a 6-story, 37-unit apartment building to be built with 0 parking on Islington and Bering on a single-family plot. And 3 councillors had enough intelligence to say, no, this is ridiculous. 2 said yes, but it still goes to city council and is going through. So why do we have community councils if they don't count?
Karen, would you like to answer that?
She's been dying for that question.
Oh, okay, you're serious.
Serious.
Yeah. So unfortunately, that community council is what's called the committee of a whole, and so the whole committee has to make opine on every decision that comes before it. So the short answer is that that's an unfortunate outcome for your community, because the community was making a position, but the city council overruled it because they felt that they knew better.
One more? Yeah, we did want to get one. Okay, one more. Last one.
Last one.
Everybody, kudos to you, Daniel Tate. I'm Carlene.
Thank you.
A Bathurst, Spadina, Fort York resident for over 20 years. This is outstanding. And Greg, so happy you're here tonight. And I see my good friend Anthony Fury here. A big question. When I ran a couple of years ago, I ran on an issue of creating some sort of therapy, physical, medical centers set up to address the drug crisis we have right now in our city, created by the politicians. This whole industry is being spurred on. When you see a lot of the people passed out on drugs on the street, they're young people, addicted, and they're going in, getting injected with drugs, spitting them out on the street. It's a crisis. So I believe we can't resolve this issue unless we have treatments, drug treatment centers to address the drug problem that's being created by these politicians.
Let me answer that.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think the provincial government's taken a step in that direction. It is a health issue, and as a city politician, I like us to stay in our lanes, back to the point about potholes, snow removal, parks, and those things. Definitely the province has taken a step in the right direction. Toronto does not have the capacity to do it alone. And I'll leave you with this one thought. When we talk about shelters, to your point about the $1 billion budget and the 10,000 spots, Toronto offers one shelter space for every 333 people. Halton, one space for every 6,000 people. York, one for every 4,000 people. We're building it, they're coming.
I just want to add that I'm hopeful that the next city council and the next mayor is going to be a real advocate for Toronto, work with the provincial government, lobby hard to say we need to really think outside of the box and fix this problem. Look, if the province can build a $900 million courthouse at 10 Armory Street, we can find some money to build new institutions to help these people who are languishing on our streets. The money's there. It's the allocation that we need help with. And the city can contribute. It has to be a partnership with the province because the status quo is failing.
This may come across to some as shameless, but it's semi-shameless. The Conservative Party of Canada promised to build 50,000 addiction recovery beds across Canada. Where would most of them have been? In the GTA. The Liberal government has promised 0 beds. 50,000 beds versus 0. A lot of them would have been here. So just in case there's 2 elections in 2026 instead of 1, keep that in mind if that issue matters to you.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. We have great merch in the corner over there. We have great shirts, posters. We got more hors d'oeuvres. We'll keep the party going till 10 p.m. with DJ Romeo. Thanks again to all the panelists and Greg Brady. Thank you.